Hey, Slick Talkers, thank you so much for tuning into this podcast. And I know that if you love this show, you'll also love my morning show called Good Morning Hospitality with my co-hosts Michael Golden and Brandy Canali, as we spend 30 minutes every Monday morning to dive into the industry's top latest news and trending topics. So go check it out on wherever you find your podcasts at Good Morning Hospitality. And you can live stream with us on Monday mornings on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and of course, YouTube. Now, I hope you enjoy this episode.
My exercise is really sitting down and I'll create a deck. What do I want my company to look like? And that deck will represent everything. So everything from the guest experience, and it might be too much. Like I will just go from the time that a person receives an email, what's that supposed to look like? What does the language look like through the entire journey of their arrival, down to the types of linens and towels and the way it's presented in a home and photographing all of that. That sets the expectation for the guest. And now mentally, I know exactly what I need to deliver. It's whether or not, how do I get there?
Welcome to Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast where we discuss all things hospitality, hotels, and business. You can find us online at slicktalkthepodcast.com and on every podcast listening platform.
As I've been growing my business and finding new ways to add to my property portfolio, I have to think about how I can anticipate the homeowner's needs, just like I do for my guests. One of the things owners always ask is, how is my property going to be protected? What happens if something gets damaged or worse? These are valid questions and concerns, and I have an opportunity to address these concerns before they even get mentioned, all thanks to having Safely as part of my toolkit. I can ensure all stakeholders are covered during a guest stay and use this information as a way to grow my business by ensuring my property owners know they can trust that I have them covered. If you're a professional property manager, then you need to get Safely in your tool belt so you can focus on operating and growing your business. Thanks for listening to Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast. Now, back to an episode. All right, everybody. Welcome back to another great episode of Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast. Super excited to have Brian Hamaoui on from Olivo Homes. We are super pumped. I got to be on his podcast, the Guest X podcast, with him and Matthew from Explory. Now, this is a great time to have a one-on-one session with Brian. And my man, thank you for joining the show today.
What's happening? I'm really excited to be here today. I've been listening to all of your podcasts, so being a guest on one is pretty cool. Full circle.
The script has flipped, my friend. So
I know it has, and I can't wait to see where it goes.
Awesome. Well, you and I got to talk a little bit after our episode when I was on your guys' show, and I got to learn a lot more about your story and your extensive background in the vacation rental space. But I think it's super unique and super cool to hear kind of like just the different innovations that you had, different experiences from technology to then property management, all this stuff. So I wanted you to, have the opportunity to go into that with the audience here, but kind of tell us, where did it really start? And then what was the journey like getting to where you guys are today with your property management company today?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm not sure that anybody's really heard the full story, and I'm not going to bore you guys with the entire story. But really, my foundation started with my dad, my parents. My dad was an entrepreneur growing up. He was everything from a builder. We had manufacturing companies that did clothing. And the last business he had was a five-star hotel on an island called Margarita in Venezuela before Chavez came in and basically created the whole dictatorship. And my dad finally said, "We're out of here. Let's pack our bags and go."
Yeah.
So within a week, we had packed our bags, and that was in 1996, 1997, somewhere around there. And his dream was always to come back to the U.S. and live in Orlando and be close to Disney World. He was an absolute Disney fanatic. So I always say he dropped me off. He lasted about 2 years and then decided to head back home and do some business over there again. And that's really where my journey began. I went to high school here, and then in 2001, we bought our first investment property together, my dad and I, and it was a short-term rental. And that was my first experience in the industry. So we ended up buying 3 units.
How old were you?
Oh God, I would have been about 18, 19, somewhere around there. 18. Yeah. And it was pretty incredible. AOL with the whole, the dial tone, trying to log in and send emails to people to try to book a house, and then running Excel spreadsheets. We really had no clue what the hell we were doing. The industry was really, really small here. And even larger companies were running things through spreadsheets. So in 2003, we ended up selling those homes, and I went to school for international business. And then from there, I went and worked for a company. Actually, it was a photography company here in Orlando. They developed all of the photo processing for Disney and Universal Studios. And I ended up becoming one of their licensing directors for the company. So I ended up opening a company that did licensing. And I owned that for about 3 years. And then decided to pivot into short-term rentals. I met my wife back then. And her parents had flown over from the UK, and they owned a short-term rental company for about 10 years. And they said, you know what, we just left the industry, sold the company, and we need short-term rental, good property managers in the area. Why don't you start one up? We'll teach you some of the ropes. So I sold absolutely everything I had, my car, everything. I had absolutely nothing. I was broke. I ended up buying a truck for about $1,500. My father-in-law gave me all of my tools, and he said, here's a brush and go paint your first house. And that's literally how I started short-term rentals in 2008, obviously with the economic downturn as well. Yeah. I then went from there. In 2011, I had this grand idea to start developing a guest experience application for the industry. I just found that people were really having a hard time planning their trips. And so I started to innovate a product called Guestbook. And within Guestbook, we basically started to build out APIs into different softwares. We built out an entire trip planning tool, and we were one of the first to start to connect to companies like Viator and Open Door. And so people were able to go inside. We had at the top, I think we were able to serve about 6,000 destinations worth of activities. We had over 100,000 activities worldwide that we could service. Wow. And so it took us quite a few years of development. We got some investment from family and friends, and we operated that all the way up until 2018 when I sold that to Blue Tent Marketing. And then previous to that, 2016, I sold my management company because I couldn't handle both of the companies. And in between, my wife we had a flower shop as well. Then she sold that. We had a child. She then took over the management company, and then we pivoted into, we ended up moving to Colorado to be with Blue Tent. And she ran a real estate business from there. And then I was one of the directors at Blue Tent, some business development and also for the Guestbook product. And then I ended up leaving there and became the VP of business operations for Properly, the cleaning software. Mm-hmm. And ended up moving back to Orlando. We just saw, growth and opportunity here again. We just keep coming back to this place. And we bought a real estate business and a long-term property management business. And lo and behold, we decided to start a short-term rental company again about 4 months ago. So that, in a nutshell, is the last 20 years of my life.
You sound like the classic entrepreneur. It's like you get that one first taste when you're probably, I would assume it's probably when you're 18 and bought those short-term rentals with your dad. And then now it's just like, it sounds like you just got hooked into not only vacation rentals, but I think that there's a lot of different avenues that this industry opens up: technology, operations, you name it, IoT connections and devices and all sorts of stuff, like experiences that you're talking about with Guestbook. Like that's all something very different yet tied together. I love it. It's classic. It's like it's a great entrepreneurial, it's an inside of the mind. Like you just kind of see like the spider web of like directions that it goes. It's super fun and fascinating.
It's a lot of fun. It's really fascinating. I hate being in my brain because I constantly have big ideas and big things to do. And really, it's just about execution, right? And having the right people around you. And I think throughout the whole entire journey, that's what I've had. I've had a lot of support, whether it was from family. My wife has been phenomenal, but even just learning from industry people. That's what's given me the ability to be able to do all of these things, and then basically come back to market. So Aliva Homes is a product of all of that. And really the goal with that is building a property management company that's geared very, very heavily towards guest experience, building something that people feel comfortable with. It's reliable for homeowners, and then starting to look at even technology that's in the industry and what's lacking, and rebuilding that whole entire network again. And that's what becomes really fascinating for me, is what direction can I start to take this in?
100%. And I think you and I had like an aha moment together on your guys' podcast, because it's very similar for us. Like, we're in the same boat. Like, how can we take all of this knowledge and experience from, you know, our past or our even present, and just how can we put together like the best of the best tech experience, mission and vision and drive for our guests and for the homeowners, for our staff. It's very like a relatable. You have a very relatable story, which I really like, because it's like, it's the breath of fresh air, not hearing it just from myself, or like, you know, you said being stuck in your brain. It's like, oh my gosh, I have all these things and thoughts, but then you hear other people are like-minded. You're like, oh, thank God I'm not alone. It's very rare. So I think it's cool.
Yeah, it is very cool. And your story was, it hit home pretty well. I know you're on the other side of the country, but you guys are doing and trying to build the exact same thing, and you're starting from the ground up. So one of the interesting things for us was we had the ability to do some acquisitions here locally of other management companies. And we quickly realized that when we restarted the company, that wasn't really the path that we wanted to take. And the pure reason behind that was that I'm looking for a very particular type of inventory. I'm also looking for relationships.
Yeah.
So for me, it's not just about acquisition of units at the moment. It's really about learning about the homes, the industry, operational, building an inventory that I can rely on, building teams around that. Yeah. So really all about games, the right owners, and then attracting the right guests into the homes.
For sure. And I want to go back to your story a little bit, just because your father-in-law gave you some tools and said, go paint your first home. So it sounds like you did start like boots on the ground, go, whether it was maintenance or housekeeping. Can you kind of maybe explain, do you see a big difference now from then when you were doing that stuff to what you guys are doing now with Aliva Homes? Like, are you seeing a big difference in the operation, boots on the ground workflow, or is it still the same hustle and bustle, kind of crazy, wild, but totally worth it type work?
Well, I think it was necessary for me to do at the very beginning. And the only reason I say that is I ended up learning the business inside and out. I did absolutely everything from cleans to maintenance to painting to pool cleaning to landscaping, all of it. Part of it was I needed to generate some revenue for myself so that I could support myself and my girlfriend and pay for the old beat up truck that I had back then. But it also taught me everything that I didn't know. I am not the handiest of people. And if I say I'm going to, fix a sink, my wife till this day probably laughs at me. It's better that somebody that knows how to do plumbing does that type of a job, but I know how to do it. And I also know what to look for to see if the job's been done right. So, and that's been every facet of our business. We are very, very hands-on. And I think if I hadn't done that, we wouldn't have run a successful business, and also wouldn't have understood when an owner comes in, what their expectation is, or when a guest comes in, what their expectation is. I am probably one of the biggest pains in the ass when it comes to checking a home, inspecting a home. And so although, I had grown my company to a fairly large size, I still did most of my inspections. I did random checks till the day we sold the company. And I'm finding myself doing the exact same thing now. So to a certain degree, yes. Now what I've done is I've hired reliable maintenance guys, and I know how to qualify my cleaners. And so those are jobs that I don't have to do. But about an hour ago, I was still in my vacation rental. I have guests arriving. I was putting all of the amenity boxes and their welcome gift and inspecting the clean and all of this kind of stuff because I like to know what's going on in my houses. And I think as soon as you don't do that, and it depends on the size of your company, but you start to lose track of the sense of your business. And I'd love to say that depending on the size that I get to next, that I still have the ability to walk into my homes and see the quality of my cleans and the service that we're providing our guests, and make sure that I'm still in touch with myself, my company, and the people I'm serving.
For sure. And this is actually, I'm really curious to know your thoughts, because I've been having this conversation probably the last 6 days in particular. But it's coming to the difference of hiring an outsourced company that's a cleaning company, but they do your vacation homes, versus hiring internally at a premium hourly rate. They're your employee. You have the right to be like, hey, you need to go back and do that, versus a cleaning company that you're like, hey, you messed up. Then they're going to be like, all right, cool, whatever. So what are you guys doing anything particular? Are you doing a mix of the two? And what are your thoughts on that? Because I feel like there's so much more control, kind of like how we know direct bookings, you have more control of that reservation rather than an OTA booking. But, we all know it's hard to find good staff right now.
And I think, again, it depends on your size. And Dirk Johnson, I've had multiple conversations with him. He's fantastic as a resource, trying to figure out when to put staff in place. But, for me, I'm a lucky guy. I have the ability to talk to past people that worked with me, and I have access. I've been in this area for so long that I still have access to really good people. Most of the people that I've ever had inside of my company have been subcontractors. And it hasn't been a detriment to my company. They've actually been incredibly loyal to me. And so there's something to be said about supporting small businesses and that mind frame. When I started my business the first time, once I had 10 homes, I had hired a small crew, and till this day, they're really, really close family members, but it gave them the ability to also grow their business. I sold my business and they continued to grow. And so I say that if it wasn't for us, probably they wouldn't have been able to do that type of thing. She came out of the hotel world. She was a cleaner in that world with her husband, and she came out, she trusted us, and I gave her every single one of my cleans. And because of it, she's able to support her family today. I don't know that at scale that works, because you don't have the same control. What I did find was that even as subcontractors, I trusted them with everything that I had. So whether they were employed by me or not, I didn't really see the difference, other than giving her the ability to scale to the size that she wanted. Yeah. I wasn't limiting her. And that, in a mental capacity for her, I think was kind of game changer, because she knew that she could go and source other sources of revenue without having to be tied up with me, although she was my one company, because she couldn't do any more.
Yeah.
I get that much business.
That makes sense. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. I just, we find, I think, I don't know, it's just the lack of, maybe it's just like some areas and some markets, the workforce, I was a hotel manager in an area that, people grew up in, never left their hometown, didn't have the strongest work ethic. And not to say that's everybody in that area, but, that was the strong majority of the workforce, where it's I'll show up when I feel like it. I'll do part of my checklist and, give or take feeling that day. So I think just the conversation of, keeping that quality and assuring that, because that's the biggest thing for us as vacation rental managers, is that, you have to maintain a quality clean. You have to maintain a quality of execution. And so I was always just curious to see how other operators in the industry in different markets are able to manage that quality and that execution.
So I think that that's a really good point. And it depends on the subcontractors. Like our teams are small teams. They're typically husband and wife. They typically act like employees, except they're making their own money. They have control of themselves. They know I have high expectations. So for me, it's setting the right expectation. If you don't meet that expectation, I'm okay with giving you a chance or two chances, but if we keep having the same recurring issue, I'm also okay with using somebody else that is going to want my business. And it's very similar. I mean, people have to pay attention to their jobs. It is, I think the job market's going to change in the next few months. I think there's a lot of government things that are going to happen that are going to make things pivot. People are going to come back and say, I need a job. And you're going to say, okay, well, you didn't want to work for the last 6 or 8 months and you took it easy. Now you want a job, prove it.
Yeah.
Right. And that doesn't work. You're going to have a massive pool of people that really do want to work. And so I think we're going to have a shift where we had a lack of almost inventory of people that didn't want to work and now need to work. And so we're going to be the picky ones. We can elevate our standards. We can tell them exactly what we want. And if it doesn't work, we have, more choices. Yeah.
Well, I recently had a friend who works for completely different industry there than the RV market. But he said his boss told him that they had, after a few changes, like you said, happened with the government, they had an influx of 121 applicants after.
That's incredible.
After 18 months of not having anything come in, looking for people. And so I think we're going to, you're 100% right. It just, I'm worried, people not working for that long and then coming back into the workforce. Ooh, man, it's going to be a hard adjustment period for a lot of people. And a lot of business owners, there's a lot of training that goes into our industry. And when you've got, someone who hasn't been used to the hustle and bustle, especially in vacation rentals, man, it's going to be fun. That's all I can say.
It is. And that's really where your vetting process comes in and understanding who you're looking for. It is really important to vet the people that you want inside of your company representing you, because at the end of the day, that's exactly what you're doing, is you're hiring people to represent your company. Yeah. And if you're just going to hire because they're the cheapest, it's probably going to end up costing you a small fortune.
100%.
Rather than hiring really, really well from the very beginning and investing time in those people. With our real estate business, my wife's actually used to be a coach for one of the largest real estate companies in the US. And that's what they do. They invest a ton of time in coaching. And so this is one of those industries where I think continually teaching your staff and talking to your staff and motivating your staff and investing in your staff is what's going to avoid you from having a lot of turnover, but ultimately give you the service that you're looking for.
Well, I love that you just said even the point before this, setting that expectation. I think you and I talked about that on your guys' podcast, was how do you set that expectation with your guests? How do you set the expectation of, you're going to get a quality product, you're going to have a quality clean, but this is what you cannot do. We do not put up with parties. We do not put up with, mistreatment of staff. If if something does go wrong, God forbid, stuff like that. How do you set that expectation in the sense of, not over communicating, not communicating enough? Like, what's a go-to thing for you when it comes to setting expectations, especially as a business owner, like communicating your vision, your mission, but then also the standards that you want to hold?
So I'm an incredibly visual person. I'm a very, I'm going to call it artistic. It's not the right word, but very creative.
Yeah.
For me, my exercise is really sitting down and I'll create a deck. What do I want my company to look like? And that deck will represent everything. So everything from the guest experience, and it might be too much. Like, I will just go from the time that a person receives an email, what's that supposed to look like? What does the language look like? Through the entire journey of their arrival, down to the types of linens and towels and the way it's presented in a home, and photographing all of that. That sets the expectation for the guest. And now mentally, I know exactly what I need to deliver. It's whether or not, how do I get there? Same thing with the business. When I look at a business and I understand what my goal is. So my goal could be that I want to be a boutique management company, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
To get to those 10 units, what does my team look like? And start with your nucleus. You are the nucleus. And then what are the different facets of your business that you need to build out? If you want to be 1,000 homes, what's the process of getting to those 1,000 homes, and what are the teams you need to build up in order to be able to service the initial deck that you built or the initial idea that you built for your guest. Because at the end of the day, every time you scale more units, you have to produce the exact same expectation for the guest. Therefore, you need the exact same team that can scale with you to be able to achieve that. And so when I look at my companies overall, I call them pods. I create pods, and I build out pods depending on how big I want to scale those companies.
Pods and podcasts? Just kidding. Just to mess with you.
Something like that.
That's great.
You know where I learned that from was outside of the industry. I looked at Spotify. When I was doing product development, when I was designing Guestbook, I was doing some research on product development and being able to put product together. And what I realized was that in order to be able to do the things that we wanted to do within Guestbook, because it was so big, we needed to have specific teams that were dedicated to specific aspects of the software. And the way Spotify does is that they actually have little pods that sit together, and it's comprised of an engineer, a product person, and then somebody like a salesperson. And that would be a pod of 3. So then they had multiple pods of exactly the same thing, and then they'd all come together and say, this is what we came up with. And it was very, very interesting. It actually molded quite a bit of what I did in the future, thinking that way.
Do you think for like vacation rentals, you could do one of a housekeeper, a maintenance person, and a guest service person that are like a pod for a certain area? Yeah,
that's exactly it. So the way I'm starting to see it, and although we're small, we know we're going to get to hopefully a volume of units.
Yeah.
It's what does each pod look like? So I'm looking at pods that do, a customer service person and a reservations person, a homeowner service person, and then a maintenance person, head of maintenance, and a head of cleaning. That being said, there could be roles, so a cleaner could possibly handle 50 to 60 units. So you'd maybe have a hybrid where she crosses over into multiple pods.
For sure. That's interesting. That's a really, I'm a visual person, so I see it in my head. And I'm like, oh, this is actually this is a new way to think about it. I like that. I like that a lot. If I steal that, I'll make sure to give you credit for it. 100%.
Thank you.
All that, of course. That's super good. Hey, I hope you guys are enjoying this episode, and I wanted to drop in quickly to let you know that our partners at Jetstream have some of the best-in-class technology that sits at the heart of the guest experience with a focus on generating revenue for your property assets. With their platform, your property gets the best-in-class tech and integrations to remote access, guest screening, booking protection, and payment processing. Better yet, their team does all of the hard work of 24/7 guest communication and content creation. So go ahead, click the link in the show notes so you can jump on board today and take advantage of their professional hospitality team. Now, we're back to the episode. Well, you got to ask me the question on your guys' show about technology. So I'm kind of curious, with you, when you guys were creating your new company, what was the first go-to? Obviously, a property management software is like a key thing to pick. But outside of that, for you guys, what were your okay, we 100% need X, Y, Z, you name it. What's the, I guess, thought process, and then why that pain point did you choose to target out of all the other operational pain points?
So a couple things. One was data. I really needed some good insight into data. So we ended up working with a couple data companies just to be able to have good insight into this market. Yeah. Because I've been so removed on the data side, pretty much. I really needed to understand how the market's operating, what my competitors are doing, and then how do we compare to them when we go to market. So I think one of the key things to understand when you go to market is, and to be real as well, is understanding what's around you. Who are your competitors? How are those? And it's not even property managers, but it's the units that are surrounding you. and then start to look even deeper into that. What are they providing? So that was actually one of my very, very first things. I ended up hiring a revenue management team to help us understand that data as well. And they work really close with us on understanding the performance of the units and or not performance of the units, because the Orlando market's we're in a bit of a lull. It's an interesting market. We don't have international travel. We thrive on international travel. And so is that something, if I'm not seeing reservations right now, am I supposed to go into a panic because I'm pricing myself out of market or I'm marketing myself incorrectly? No, it's just the way the market is. So a lot of market data, a lot of insight into the market. That's number one. Number two is automation. Mm-hmm. When I did property management before, automation just wasn't there. There wasn't things like the door lock systems that you could remotely press a button against this, checks at the house and they can't get in. And I'm racing over at 2:00 in the morning trying to unlock a door. And the guests are there all pissed off because they've been there for an hour waiting for me to get there. So one of the next steps was for me to actually start to automate my homes, things like door locks, and even email automation and messaging systems. So there's some fantastic technology all around guest apps and guest technology and all of this kind of stuff. But at the very core, there are very few things that you need to do to meet your customer's expectation when it comes to guest experience. Mm-hmm. One is communication. You just need to communicate really well and deliver that communication on time. Yeah. To do that, you have to implement systems because they're available and it's cheap. It could cost you $5-6 per property per month, but if you had a human being sitting there and doing all of that stuff manually, that's time that they could be spending doing other stuff, creating content, or, there's other operational stuff that they could be doing or enjoying their job a little bit more other than sending door codes out. Yeah. So it was a combination of automation of homes, and then an application to be able to deliver that communication correctly to our guests. And I think those are probably the three things that we looked into other than the PMS itself at the very beginning.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I think access control, automation, and overall experience, like you're talking about, were the number ones that we did too. It's like we're remote management pretty much. Like we're not able to go inspect all of our homes in person due to them being in specific markets, but having that ability to see when the code was used at the door and to make sure that the guests were getting the messages on time through the right proper channels and all the other stuff, super key. Without that, we wouldn't be able to do the business at the end of the day. We could, but it would have to be at a super hyper local market. And we would have to find all these other manual ways to do that process. So
it's really cool. I mean, today was a perfect example. I had a guest checking in this afternoon. I noticed last night that my pool, one of my units, hadn't turned on because we have an application that tells us pool's not accessible. And I tried to get it to turn on, nothing. So I ended up sending my pool company out first thing this morning before the guest arrived. And lo and behold, there was an issue with the pool and they were able to repair it before the guest arrival. That would have probably not happened if my homeowners or we wouldn't have invested in that type of technology, because I would have had to arrive at the house, inspect it, realize that the pool's not working, and then call them to say something's wrong. And it would have probably been 2:00 in the afternoon before guest check-in, which is too late. Yeah, I caught it now in advance because of software.
Well, can I ask you this now? Because I think, these conversations behind doors are always cool to bring to the forefront. I've been having conversations with friends and they're, telling them about the business and how life is going and catching up over drinks and stuff. And being like, well, at the end of the day, being a startup, we're not profitable yet. You have to understand that there are onboarding costs with new units. There's operation costs, whether you're getting reservations or not, you still have to pay for this technology on the back end. So for you guys, how did you balance out what tech, for that pool software or technology, what makes you go, this is an investment? How do you calculate, I guess, your choice of investment for technology to go into play? Obviously automation and PMS stuff kind of comes into it. You have to do that. But I just feel there's all these different, like, how do you choose between what ones are worth having up front versus having later? That whole scenario.
You can always test. So there's core technology that I can't live without. And then there's fun stuff that I'm messing with and spending money on, pretty much just, throwing away money to see if it's something that's going to stick and is viable and makes sense for the business. So my core technology is, there's no way without it. And I have the funds to be able to cover that.
Sure.
Everything else is just, nice to have. The pool technology and the remote lock systems, we require that as part of our property management. So we're very upfront with our homeowners, and there's, we have it built into our agreement that they have to have certain technologies at their house. Part of it's funded by them, part of it's funded by us with some of the startup fees as well. With our startup fees, really what we've done is we reinvest in the house. It's not really that we're taking money and we're putting it into a reserve and calling it marketing funds and then spending it on dinners or whatever. We actually reinvest. The reason we do it is we reinvest all of that money to build some of this stuff. So that's kind of my view on it. Is then there's different approaches on it, but we have funds allocated to be able to do some of the things that we do. Period.
That makes sense.
And outside of that, it becomes an expense. And then we have to revisit. If it's profitable, and fantastic. If it's not profitable, it's got to go.
Yeah, no, I like that. We do the same thing. So hearing that there's an expert in the industry that actually does that too, it makes me feel a lot better. I'm like, okay, because you get all the time when having owner conversations with new potential clients that are going to be onboarding with you. They're like, well, Vacasa doesn't have a startup fee for me, or Evolve, and it's like, okay, yeah, like. True, but they're also going to be charging like 30 to 40%, all this other stuff. But and
it's a different business model, and they're a different scale, and it's a completely different type of experience. 100%. And so, things like Vacasa, I appreciate what they've done. They're a phenomenal company. They've taught the industry a whole lot of things. Vacasa wasn't what it was when I was backup property manager in 2008. They managed to scale. They had a different business mindset as well and a different goal. I operate a different model. And so that means that my entire experience is different than what Vacasa is probably providing for their guests. And that makes me comfortable with the model that I go to market with. Yeah. If I'm comfortable with who my company is and what I'm going to provide, as long as there's value, and I've got an expectation of fees, as long as I execute on what I say I'm going to do, I have no problem with going out to market with that business model, because I feel good about it, right? If I go to market saying I'm going to take 40% of your revenue and then you fail at every single aspect of it, then you need to really rethink what you're doing. It doesn't make sense. Your owners are going to be pissed off. Your guests are going to give you bad reviews, and it's a trickle down effect. Success is probably not likely.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, another question you guys got to ask me on your show, which I'm curious to learn more. You kind of mentioned it now. You pick a certain model for your company. You have a certain way that you want to operate when it comes to quality, experience, innovation, technology, all this stuff. So how do you know it's scalable, or how do you know to scale this in a way that, is this a model that can be scaled like Vacasa, or does it have its limits? I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on, scalability.
Scalability is an interesting question. The answer to that question is you probably don't know. Most businesses go through multiple reiterations of their business and business models. And so, if you think that you're going in and you're going to go from 0 to 1,000 units without change, it's most likely not likely. You're going to go through several iterations of your business, whether it's operations or what you've put in place, including your business model. It's eventually going to change. And it depends. I mean, if you're self-funding, it probably has a factor on your business model. If you're looking for investment, that has a different factor. And so, there's so many variables. I think the one thing you have to understand as an entrepreneur is, what's your goal? because not for every scaling to some people is scaling to 10 units. And it could be 10 phenomenal units that are renting for $10,000 a night. Or you could be looking at scaling like, Steve Milo is he's a great example. Going and acquiring businesses and growing from a few hundred units to, he's just done another acquisition. I don't even know, north of 2,500 units, I think, but he knows what he's trying to achieve. And so I can guarantee you that his business model has changed a few times.
100%. Yeah.
So you have to be okay with that.
True. You have to be okay with change. And I think, I hate for all of my listeners, I hear me say this all the time, that, I'm a big fan of Gary Vee, and he's like, it's okay to change your mind. Like, it's okay. Like, it's okay to be like, one day I'm all in for revenue share and I'm all in for this. And then the next year, like, you know what, I'm going to try arbitrage. I'm going to change my mind. I'm not going to do that. I personally don't believe in the arbitrage model to be a very sustainable model. But at the end of the day, if I do change my mind, I have the ability to do so. And I think it's okay for entrepreneurs, like you said, to expect it. Like, you're going to have a lot of trial and error. You're going to learn what you like, what you don't like, what headaches are going to be solved or recreated if you go a certain way. And you have to be okay with, making that choice of, changing with it.
I think the most dangerous thing an entrepreneur can do is get stuck in their ways.
100%.
If you're stuck in one model and you think that is the perfect model, and that change is just not an option inside of your business, that to me is a dangerous perspective. It's very, very dangerous. Like, it's very building a business is a lot like building software. It's exactly the same thing. You are building pieces to your business. You're building pieces to a piece of software, and those pieces change. Technology changes. Management changes. We saw this COVID in the last 18 months, the whole industry changed. And so if your company didn't change over COVID, maybe you're lucky, but maybe you're leaving money on the table as well. Like, you're not taking a deeper look into potentially what it could have grown your company more, or your revenue more, or, even down to little things like, how can you improve your guest experience? Just those small changes are significant changes inside of your company, and you have to be able to acknowledge them.
Yeah, especially I think COVID, for people listening, they know we've said this multiple times, but it's like COVID is the ultimate example of sink or swim for a lot of people. Like, the whole industry, and let alone the world and every other industry among it, had to figure out how to sink or swim. And that was that mindset going in. I know for me, like, I quit my day job as a hotel manager December 27th, 2019. And I told myself December 29th or the 28th, sink or swim, sink or swim, sink or swim, not knowing there was going to be a global pandemic that shut down the whole freaking world. But I think seeing how many people, and granted, there's a lot of stuff out of our control, when platforms like, I'm not actually going to say the name, but platforms that refund guests 100% without any thought going into the management or the owners on their platform, or all this other stuff. There's a lot of stuff outside of your control, but it's how you handle that, and with the change that comes. So I think, 100%, like you said, the worst thing you could do is get in your own way with your old mindset and with your old thinking.
And that's a really good point. Because and that goes down to your business model, but it's made a lot of people realize as well where they want to source their revenue from, and how creative can you get. And there are a lot of companies that have done an excellent job from pivoting from OTAs to trying to book more direct. And that's become a new thing. But we also have access to people a lot more. Like 3 or 4 years ago, you didn't have access to volumes of people through, your Instagrams and Facebooks. And we just don't do that kind of stuff well in our industry. There are very, very few people that execute that really well. And it's difficult. It's very time consuming. But if you execute well, man, can it earn you some good revenue.
Yeah. Well, you and I were talking about that previously. It was LinkedIn, LinkedIn and podcasting. Like, who would have thought, a resume platform that was really kind of like, that's pretty much all it was like a job site, turning into a social media, mogul that just came in and created, business and professional and entrepreneurial influencers. And then now we have podcasts where you have unlimited amount of consumable content anywhere and everywhere that you are in the world. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. Like,
did you ever think you were going to be doing a podcast for a couple thousand people in our industry and spearheading that?
No, never.
Crazy.
Yeah. Like when I started the podcast, I literally was like, oh, this is kind of fun. Like there's no podcasts in the hotel world for young people. So I'm going to make one. And then, all of a sudden, like a year later, I quit my job. So it was wild. But yeah, it's just like the power of, community, but then access, like you're talking about. I think it's super, super intense. It can be a lot sometimes, but anyways, yeah, enough about that. I'm super so what's next for you? Like you guys you said you started this company like 4 months ago, 5 months ago?
Yeah, about 3-4 months ago, somewhere around there. I don't know. It's a bit of a blur because we were simultaneously running the other companies and we were like, do we do it? Do we not do it? Do we do it? Do we not do it? And then one day I was like, all right, let's do this. Let's explore it and see how it goes. So we're about 3-4 months into it, somewhere around there. And so far, so good. I mean, we're a small company. And again, I'm not looking to grow incredibly fast. I'm trying to understand the ecosystem and building the right product to then scale it. So my speed to market will probably be in the next few months.
Awesome. And tell me about your guys' podcast. That was so awesome to be on. Obviously, I'm going to plug it on the show notes, but how did that kind of come about with you and Matthew? I'm just kind of curious on what started that.
So I have a fascination for guest experience. Everything to do with guests. There's just something about getting guests engaged in, whether it's through technology or just providing awesome guest experience on the ground, or there's something there. I have a massive passion for it. And I know Matt does too. And a few years back, Guestbook, so our guest experience platform, was talking to Explorer about possibly doing something together. And I got to meet Matt, and over the years, we stayed in touch. And we were talking one day, it was about maybe 4 months ago. And I said to Matt, hey, what about if we start this guest experience podcast? And he goes, what? And I was like, let's just do it. And Matt was like, all right, let me float this idea by marketing.
Yeah.
And so he went back to his team, and I think it took us like 2 weeks and we were up and running. He has like an unbelievable team behind him. He's a super, super smart guy. And really the goal was kind of taking that idea of, let's present what's in the current marketplace. Let's find out what people are doing with guest experience and have some fun with it. Super lighthearted discussions. And whether it's property managers or technology, and I call them technologists. Yeah. I still don't know if that's the right term. And then also, and maybe I'm giving this away, but some really awesome people outside of the industry. I'm a huge fan of learning what's happening inside of the industry. I mean, massive fan of learning what's outside of the industry and implementing what's outside of the industry to what we're not doing right now.
Yeah.
And so we've got some really, really cool guests coming on that have nothing to do with short-term rentals at all, even though that's our bread and butter. But man, some of these guys are just super cool. So I'm stoked. I'm stoked for some of the future episodes. I think we've got somewhere in the region of like 30 to 35 guests already on the list. And
awesome.
Our team's just going bananas trying to edit all of this stuff. So kudos to all of our team behind us and Matt for putting up with some of my stuff and helping me bring this to life. But yeah, between him and I, it's been a lot of fun.
That's so cool. I love outside perspectives, and I don't think enough people in the industry go for outside perspective. It's very small town feel where it's like, well, I've been here for 20 years and ain't nobody going to tell me otherwise type attitude sometimes, but super cool. So I'm excited to tune in. I'll keep my eyes out on LinkedIn for all your guys' upcoming episodes. Obviously, not to brag, but I did subscribe after, getting to air on your guys' show. So it's really.
You are a good guest.
Thank you.
You are awesome. It's a lot of fun. It's really fun when you get a guest in and it's not scripted like the one today.
Yeah.
And that was one of those things where I said, if you script a podcast, it's not authentic. I want just authenticity from our guests. So we have CEOs coming in and their people are like, well, give us an outline of what's going to happen. I'm like, well, if I give you an outline of what's going to happen, it's just going to go sideways.
Yeah.
What we do is we give them the ability to just make sure that the content is right after we produced it, before we publish it. And I have to say we are at 100% so far. We stay on track. So it's just cool. It's fun.
It's super fun. And I think you get to learn a lot. Like in the beginning of Slick Talk, I would do a lot more outline scripted. I would say fully scripted, but very more outline oriented. And I was just not having fun. I was like, man, this sucks. Like, I like this conversation, but it's like, I already know what's happening. I want to know, I want you to catch me off guard type deal. Like I want you to say something super cool and heartfelt. So like you were saying, I want people to be unfiltered and kind of just have this understanding that they can say what's right at the top of their mind right away, instead of having to be like premeditated thought of guest experiences, how you make people feel. I don't want people to automatically like just quote scripture, basically is what I call it. But it's just, that I want people. Yeah. So 100%. I think it's.
So once it becomes scripted, it just becomes another speech, and it becomes the same topic. You don't go often. You don't really learn from people because it's so scripted. Find when things are unauthored, you just get to know people so much better, and you get to pick their brain a little bit more, throw them off guard.
Yeah.
And that's kind of cool. I like seeing people just pause and then think about it and give you an answer.
That's very good. I like that. That's awesome. Well, I give every guest the opportunity to give a shameless shout out, plug in, you name it. Everything's going to be placed in the show notes, but where's the best place people can find you, learn more about you, and then, of course, your podcast?
So we'll start with the podcast. Go to guestxpodcast.com. All of our details are on there. You can submit a form. If you guys have any suggestions for people that you want to hear or talk about, or topics you want to talk about, honestly, we're open to it. We've had quite a few people come to us and say, can you do an episode on such and such a person or such and such a topic? And we'll take those into consideration with the team. And as long as we haven't produced it already, we're happy to do it. Yeah. As far as property management goes, Aliva Homes, you can reach me directly, Brian at Aliva Homes. That's ALLEVO homes.com. We're a newer company, so look out, because there is a lot of development. We're going to be doing some pretty cool announcements here in the next few weeks. So we're on the path to growth. And honestly, if there's anybody that needs help or has questions, whether it's operational or related to guest experience, or just wants to pick my brain about technology in the marketplace, or wants to meet people, cool people like you, touch base with me. I'm massive on LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. It's probably one of my favorite platforms. Brian Hamaoui on LinkedIn. Look me up, connect. Let's connect.
All right. Well, you heard it first here, Slick Talkers. Go ahead, check out all the show notes. Subscribe, like, follow along, because we got an amazing guest just like Brian on the show, and I couldn't be more thankful. So Brian, my man, thank you once again for being on Slick Talk, and we will be talking again very, very soon.
Appreciate you having me on, Will.
Of course.
Thank you so much for listening. We love your support and want to provide the best we can to all our listeners. So please find us online, social media, and on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and Google Podcast.
Smart locks, smart thermostats, automation, and a solution for any hotel and vacation rental company. Our show partners at Operto are the leading solution for operators to enhance their operations by integrating with your property management software and making sure that all your smart devices create a contactless guest experience while streamlining your operations. So don't forget to check them out on their website. Send me a message, or just let them know that Will sent you and you are in good hands. So get ready to enjoy another episode of Slick Talk, the Hospitality Podcast, and check out operto.com, or go to the podcast website and see our partners page. What's up, everybody? If you've gotten this far into the episode of Slick Talk, the Hospitality Podcast, then you are amazing, and thank you so much for tuning in. We want to send you two places really quickly. If you can, check out the show notes and click the hospitality.fm link. Check out all of our other shows on the podcast network. And don't forget, if you have someone that you want to hear on the podcast, then fill out the guest fill out form so that way we can get them on the show. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy another episode of Slick Talk, the Hospitality Podcast.